I'm John Strum, and this is Real Talk MS. It's July 28th, and we have a lot to talk about. But before we get into today's episode, there's a little housekeeping announcement that we should get to, and then I have a favor to ask. Listener ratings and reviews are an important part of the podcast universe, but asking you to leave a rating and a review for Real Talk MS or any podcast can be tricky, because the way that you find your way to the right place to leave a podcast review depends on which app you use to listen to podcasts and what other software you might have loaded onto your phone or your tablet or your desktop computer. And that sounds confusing in itself. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I found a way to make it really easy for you to leave a rating and review for Real Talk MS. And I'm hoping some of you won't mind taking a moment to do that. Here's how simple it is. If you point your browser to realtalkms.com/review, you'll see links to the different online destinations that you can choose from to leave that rating and review. And those links are going to be based upon the software that you happen to be using to listen to podcasts, or the software that you might have installed on your phone, tablet, or desktop computer. For instance, if you happen to be using an Android phone to listen to Real Talk MS, you won't see a link to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because you can't leave a review on Apple Podcasts with an Android phone. I hope that makes sense. It's just a little bit of technology that makes leaving a rating and review super easy. So if you have a spare moment, and that's all it will take, I'd appreciate it if you visit realtalkms.com/review, click on one of the online destinations that you see, and leave a rating and review for Real Talk MS. Cognitive decline and mood issues, specifically depression, are two of the more common and visible symptoms of multiple sclerosis, impacting at least half of all the people living with MS. My guest today is Dr. Meghan Beier. Dr. Beier is an assistant professor of physical medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and a rehabilitation neuropsychologist. She specializes in cognitive rehabilitation and neuropsychological assessment and intervention, and we're going to be talking about ways that you can best manage MS-related cognitive problems and depression. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Meghan Beier, there are a few other things that you should know about. At a time when the COVID-19 pandemic has put most MS research on hold, the National MS Society is reminding us that MS doesn't stop, and neither does the Society's commitment to funding the research that will bring us closer to stopping MS progression, restoring lost function, and ending the disease forever. And that's much more than just a snappy-sounding slogan. The MS Society is walking that talk by announcing a $16 million investment in 50 new research initiatives and additional training fellowships. The National MS Society is the largest private funder of MS research in the world, and this latest round of funding brings their current global research investment total to $65 million. And since the founding of the Society, that investment totals more than $1 billion. The newly funded research initiatives include developing a telehealth obesity intervention for MS patients, testing the effectiveness of non-invasive brain stimulation to treat MS-related cognitive deficits, exploring whether cells involved in aging are associated with disease severity in people with MS, and another study that's looking at whether cells involved in aging are related to progression of MS-like disease, and even using a home-based trial that takes advantage of digital tools for a study that will test a novel molecule that may repair myelin in women with MS between the ages of 45 and 60. There were 50 new research initiatives being funded through this $16 million investment, and if you'd like to review all of the newly funded initiatives and training fellowships, you'll find a link in today's show notes. A small pilot study at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine indicates that low-dose ketamine may help treat MS-related fatigue. Last week, in episode 151 of the podcast, we talked with Dr. Heidi Maloney about how fatigue is such a common and debilitating symptom among people living with MS. Surprisingly, there isn't a tremendous amount of research looking for ways to better manage fatigue, and there aren't any medications that have been specifically approved for managing MS-related fatigue. Previous research has shown that people with MS who are treated with medications that block the activity of a neurotransmitter called glutamate experience increased fatigue. And the hypothesis was that increasing glutamate activity might have the opposite effect and actually reduce fatigue. So the research team looked at ketamine, which is used for anesthesia and also used to treat severe depression. And one of the effects of ketamine is that it increases the amount of glutamate in the brain. So 18 participants were recruited for this pilot study. Half the participants received low-dose ketamine, and half received an active placebo. And after 1 week of treatment, there was actually no difference in daily fatigue between the two groups of patients. However, there was a statistically significant decrease in fatigue severity among the participants who were receiving ketamine, and this decrease in fatigue severity lasted for several weeks after the study. So this was just a small pilot, but it successfully makes the case that we need to see a larger study to determine whether low-dose ketamine may represent a step toward developing a reliable treatment to manage MS-related fatigue. And I know you can appreciate how that would be life-changing for so many people living with MS. If you'd like to review the details of this study, you'll find a link in today's show notes. There's a tremendous amount of interest and even intense advocacy throughout the MS community surrounding cannabis and cannabis-based products. And one product category that's actually been put through the rigor of scientific study is CBD, or cannabidiol, the non-hallucinogenic component of cannabis. There are some studies that have shown CBD to be beneficial in managing MS-related spasticity and pain. But because cannabis is still illegal under U.S. federal law, there's no federal oversight, no FDA approval process for cannabis-based products. And this has unfortunately muddied the waters and made it extremely difficult for patients who want to take advantage of cannabis-based products. For one thing, there are other products that use both CBD and THC. THC is the hallucinogenic component of cannabis, and there isn't yet any research that indicates THC is beneficial for managing any MS symptom. But the difficulty doesn't end there. Even among so-called pure CBD products, the lack of federal oversight has made it challenging to know which manufacturers are telling us the truth. To illustrate this confusion and highlight the inherent risk that exists today, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration tested 147 products claiming to contain just CBD. These tests took place between 2014 and 2019, and initially, the FDA tested 78 products from manufacturers that they did not consider to be very credible or reliable. Of the 78 products tested, the FDA found that a large percentage also contained THC, although THC was not listed as an ingredient anywhere on the product label. In 2019, the FDA tested 41 cosmetic products that were being marketed as containing CBD. Of the 41 products tested, 14 listed a specific CBD concentration on their label. And of these 14 products, 8 contained less than 80% of the amount of CBD that they claimed. Only 4 products came within 20% of having the amount of CBD specified, and 2 products had more than 120% of the amount of CBD listed. And of the 41 products tested, 12 contained THC, although it wasn't included as an ingredient on any of those labels. The FDA found additional products that claimed to contain CBD, but didn't at all, and several more contained THC without listing it as an ingredient. So from the total sample of 147 products that were tested, only 45% contained within 20% of the amount of CBD that was listed on their labels, and 49% also contained the hallucinogenic component THC without listing it as an ingredient on a single label. And this isn't to say that CBD may not be a real solution for some people living with MS-related spasticity or pain. It is to say that without regulation, it's hard to know what you're buying. And I think that consumers ought to know whether they're purchasing something that includes a hallucinogenic compound. There are some highly reputable companies involved in the manufacture of CBD-based products, but without the appropriate oversight, it's impossible to know whether the CBD oil that you're about to use was manufactured using the very best protocols in the cleanest and safest environments, or if it was mixed up in some guy's basement or garage. It's impossible to compare dosage from one bottle or jar to the next, and as the FDA has clearly demonstrated, it's impossible to even know what's in that bottle or jar. Now, if this sounds like I'm somehow against cannabis-based treatments, I'm not. What I'm against is dispensing unregulated treatments of any kind, because they have the potential to create bigger problems than the ones we hope they solve. I hope our federal regulators begin demanding the same transparency and providing the same guidelines and oversight to the production of cannabis-based products that are designed to treat MS symptoms that they do to every other type of MS medication. Then we can begin to consider the benefits of these products without having to fear the risks. And if you'd like to review the report that the FDA submitted to the U.S. Congress, you'll find a link to that report in today's show notes. Hallucinogenics like THC are sometimes used by people desperate to self-treat for MS-related depression. But there are better, more reliable ways to manage the depression and the cognitive decline that MS can cause. In a moment, we'll talk about the steps you can take to manage these two very common but very challenging MS symptoms when we meet my guest, Rehabilitation Neuropsychologist Dr. Meghan Beier. Dr. Meghan Beier is an assistant professor of physical medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine and a rehabilitation neuropsychologist. Dr. Beier specializes in cognitive rehabilitation and neuropsychological assessment and intervention, and her research is focused on cognitive rehabilitation, mental health, and the healthy aging of individuals with multiple sclerosis. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Beier.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to jump into two issues that are very common amongst people living with MS, and that's going to be cognition and mood. I'm wondering, how common are cognitive issues in MS, and how do cognitive issues typically present themselves in MS?
Sure. Yeah. Cognitive problems are very common for people with multiple sclerosis. There's approximately 65% of people that have MS will experience some change in their cognition throughout their lifetime. What typically happens in people that have cognitive changes is the primary symptom in MS is that people have difficulty with brain speed, or what we call processing speed. So what that looks like in real life is that it may take the same amount of time. It may take longer than it used to do tasks like writing an email. Or if you're talking to somebody and they're talking rather quickly, it might feel difficult to process that information. So sometimes I have people describe that as sort of like the Charlie Brown effect, where they're hearing the noise, but they're not processing what the person is saying. So again, that's brain speed. Some other things that are really common for people with MS is that they get easily distracted or they can't concentrate on two things at once. Like if they are talking to somebody and there's a TV on in the background, that can get very distracting, or they can feel very overwhelmed. People often have difficulties with word finding problems, so they can't get their thought out or they can't think of a specific word. Sometimes they might even use the wrong word in a sentence. So instead of saying something like, "Oh, look at that squirrel on the tree," they might say something like, "Oh, look at that beaver," right? They replace it with another animal, but they say the wrong word. And many times they might have to talk around a word before it comes out. Another difficulty is that people have difficulty learning new information. So they describe having to reread sentences or paragraphs, having to rewatch TV shows, or having difficulty remembering what is said in different conversations with friends or family or coworkers. And they might have to ask the person to repeat themselves to really remember what they're talking about.
How does someone know when it's time to discuss cognitive symptoms with their doctor, and what does the assessment process involve?
Sure. I think it's never too early to talk about cognitive symptoms with your doctor. Number one, because there are a lot of preventative things that somebody can do to keep their brain healthy, active, and engaged, and to either slow or stop decline in cognition over time. And so that's one reason to talk to your doctor about it, even if you're not really noticing cognitive changes, just to say, what can I do to prevent these things from happening, or to reduce the chances of them happening. The other piece of it is that if you have family members, friends, coworkers who are noticing cognitive changes, then it might be worth talking to your doctor about. Or if any cognitive changes are having an impact on your relationships or the things that you like to do every day or on your work, then it's worth talking to somebody about it.
And can cognitive problems that are caused by MS be treated?
Absolutely, yes. So there's a number of different things I talk with people that have cognitive concerns. The first step that I usually try to assess is, what are any contributors to cognitive difficulties that are outside of MS? I think there's kind of 4 levels of treatment that I usually look at, and that's one of them. So if there are medications that somebody is on, like some bladder medications have an impact on cognition, then we might want to look at those and see if there are alternative medications that could be useful for that person, or eliminating other health conditions that could impact cognition, like sleep apnea, or even just poor sleep. So eliminating or addressing any contributors outside of MS would be a first step. A second step would be making sure that the person is optimizing their overall health. So are they exercising regularly in whatever way that they can exercise? Are they eating healthy? And we know that if your body is healthy, then usually you have a healthier brain as well. So eating healthy, exercising, and socially engaging with others can help your brain stay active and engaged. We also want to optimize emotional health. There's a direct link between your emotional health and how well your brain is performing. So there was a study that was done that looked at people with MS and people with MS that had depression. And when people with MS that had depression, they actually had worse processing speed, or were 2 to 3 times more likely to get distracted by their environment when they had depression. And so while people without depression still could have some cognitive symptoms, they were much more likely to have cognitive symptoms if they also had a mood disorder. So we want to optimize emotional health. And then finally, there are specific interventions that can be done for cognition itself. So there's a lot of studies that are coming out of Kessler and other places looking at interventions for memory and processing speed that can be done one-on-one with a therapist, like a speech therapist or an occupational therapist. And I kind of think about that like physical therapy for your brain. It's kind of exercising those areas that are weaker to make them stronger. There's also at-home programs. So Brain HQ has been used in several different studies and has found that people with MS are seeing an improvement in their overall cognition when they do those exercises by computer. The one thing I do tell most of my patients if they want to try those at-home exercises is they do cost money. And, I don't want to advocate for somebody spending a lot of money indefinitely. So the studies were, 12-ish weeks long. And so I tell people to kind of do the brain exercises like they did in the study, for, 12 plus weeks, and then do booster sessions every so often. Brain HQ was looked at in a healthy aging population outside of MS, and they did booster sessions once a year after their intensive intervention. And they found that people kind of maintained their processing speed over time by doing that. So certainly, we don't want to advocate for people spending a lot of money, but there are definitely exercises that can be done from home.
Shifting gears a little bit, depression is a very common experience among people living with MS. In fact, about half of all the people living with MS will experience a major depressive episode at some point in their lives. So I have a two-part question for you. Why do so many people with MS experience depression? And is that depression a physiological function or an actual symptom of their MS? Or is that depression an emotional reaction to living with the uncertainty and unpredictability of MS?
I think it's both. There's more and more data that's showing a clear link between structural brain changes and the experience of depression, but it is more difficult to manage and cope with the changes that are brought on by MS. And so one particular study showed that, or kind of suggested that it may be that there are these structural brain changes that make somebody more vulnerable. And when something happens in your life that becomes that it's stressing or emotionally taxing, they're more likely to kind of be pushed over the edge into depression because of those brain changes. So it's likely kind of both factors that are playing together.
I've often said that depression is this 600-pound gorilla that's sitting in the middle of the room, because when you're dealing with depression, so many other things can get worse. You may not feel motivated to keep appointments with your neurologist, physical therapist, or other members of your care team. You may not stay on your disease-modifying therapy. You may isolate yourself from your friends and family, and all of these things have a very real impact, not only on your quality of life, but on your physical health as well. Not to mention that you might actually see other MS symptoms worsen. So to me, depression has the potential to get in the way of everything. And getting help dealing with that depression is so critical. So what are some early signs or symptoms of depression that someone living with MS should be aware of? And what steps should they take if they see any of these signs or symptoms?
I first want to sort of distinguish what is a normal reaction to living with through difficult circumstances or having something difficult occur versus depression. So it's certainly normal for people to feel grief over functional changes. It's certainly normal for people to feel frustrated or irritated about things that happen, or even small things that happen throughout the day. But if the person starts living in those symptoms, meaning those symptoms kind of last all day, every day, or most of the day for more than a couple of days, then I start to think, okay, this might be a little bit more than just your typical reaction to something, unless there's a typical grief period for something that happened, like the death of a loved one or a really serious change in your functioning, that can last up to 6 months. But if you're seeing persistent low mood for a long period of time, then it's worth getting help. Also, if you're noticing that those symptoms are interfering with your relationships with others, like you mentioned, if they're getting in the way of you going to doctor's appointments or being less engaged with family and friends, or they're getting in the way of things that you usually enjoy, then it's usually time to try and find some help. So what do people do? There's certainly a number of different levels, and it's always helpful to get some extra support, even if you don't have a depressive episode. So there's lots of good books out there that have been written by psychologists who do a lot of research in this area. One that I usually recommend is something that's called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. And that's a really good book that's written by the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy. And he's written a few other books. His name is Stephen Hayes, but those are really good books, especially for people living with MS. There's some apps. There's something called Wobot, which is it's kind of an interactive free app that you can write what you're feeling and what you're experiencing in kind of a chat based forum. And this AI robot will come back and give you some exercises and different ways to think about the situation. And that was developed by some psychologists out of Stanford. So both of those are some good resources to start at home. If that's not enough, then it's worth working with a therapist, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. Therapists and psychologists focus on talk therapy or psychotherapy. A psychiatrist might do some of that, but will also do medication management. And I usually tell people to try and find somebody that has some experience in health. It may not be MS, but in some sort of health condition. And you can do that either through the National MS Society by calling one of the Navigators. There's also online directories like Psychology Today and others that are resources. If somebody has a really intensive mood problems, then I would probably recommend something like an intensive outpatient program, but that's for somebody who has a really deep depression that, isn't really getting better with some of these other things.
A member of the Real Talk MS community shared with me that in their experience, just finding a therapist who specializes in working with people living with MS are two very different things that certainly in their case produced two very different outcomes. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask you about this next step that we sometimes overlook. How important is it to find a therapist who works with people living with MS? How do you go about doing that? And what sorts of questions should you be asking during your initial conversation with that therapist?
I hear this question all the time, and I often get asked by other doctors and even other psychologists for help finding referrals. It's not easy, but if you can find a person that specializes in MS, I think that's ideal because they really understand the ins and outs of what medications you're on, of how those medications can impact mood or cognition or other things. And I would say right now, the best way to do that is through the MS Society. They have a lot of resources for partners in care, and you can do that but either with an online search on the MS Society's website or by calling the MS Navigators. If you can't really find somebody there, then I usually tell people to try and find a therapist that has a specialization in health or working with health populations. And the reason I say that is because there are a lot of things that are common to MS that a therapist with no experience working with health populations might not fully understand. So it may be completely normal to have thoughts and worries about an exacerbation or future decline. And so a therapist who has no experience with MS might think that those worries are unfounded. And so we need to do something with those thoughts that are a little bit different because they can actually be real thoughts. Also, MS can have an impact on sleep in a way that is different than the general population who might have sleep problems. So for example, a sleep intervention with a psychologist that you might do with a person without MS would involve getting out of bed or doing certain things that if you have MS and you have difficulty with your physical functioning or walking, you might not be able to do the things that they're recommending to you. So I do think it's important to work with somebody that kind of has a little bit of experience beyond just typical psychotherapy. Again, I think Psychology Today has an option for chronic illness. They don't specify MS. There's another website called helppro.com that there is the option for somebody that has experience with MS or health conditions. And you could also search for things like health psychology, and there are listings for like the Board of Health Psychology will list people that have gotten training in health psychology. And so there are a few different options out there, but it does take a little bit of digging in the internet.
I know that's going to be really helpful. And you mentioned contacting an MS Navigator through the MS Society. My listeners have heard me talk about the Navigator program many times. I think it's remarkable. If you're a newer listener, it is one-on-one, personalized, problem-solving support. They connect you to the very best resources, and they're specific to what you happen to be searching for. So I'm going to make sure to include all the ways you can contact an MS Navigator in today's show notes. Dr. Meghan Beier, thank you for all that you do to improve the quality of life for people living with MS. And thanks for talking with me today.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you so much for inviting me.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/152. You'll find that link in today's show notes so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or text. I don't think I have to tell anyone listening to this podcast that the COVID-19 pandemic has intensified and in some cases multiplied the challenges of living with MS. From having difficulty affording MS medications, to adjusting to increased isolation, to coping with the added uncertainty of wondering how you or your family might be personally affected by COVID-19. More than ever before, people living with MS need access to reliable information, support, and connection. We're witnessing that even during a pandemic, MS doesn't stop, and neither does the National MS Society. So they've established the National MS Society COVID-19 Response Fund to ensure that the Society can continue meeting the urgent and expanding needs of the MS community during these unprecedented times. During the pandemic, we've seen the MS Society create virtual programming and support groups literally on the fly so that no one has to face MS alone. They've created resources and provided information so that doctors and nurses can deliver the very best care. They've continued to amplify the voices of the MS movement to influence critical public policy decisions, and as we've discussed in today's podcast episode, they've never stopped advancing research to find cures for MS. I know that these are financially tough times for a lot of people, but I'm asking that as you're able, please make a donation to support the National MS Society. To donate, you can text the word GIVE to 68686, and you'll get a link right to the MS Society's COVID-19 Response Fund webpage. Or if you prefer, I've created an online shortcut to get you to that same webpage, so you can visit realtalkms.com/COVID-19 Response Fund and make your donation. And you'll find that link in today's show notes. But however you choose to contribute, please contribute today. It's never been more important. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.